Hugh, let's look at the numbers of votes that are being counted and show them on the back screen here, yes and no. So 1,055,716 yes, 1,256,372, the larger number saying no. That is the situation at this moment. I can show you the percentages so far. The yes vote so far on 46% and the no vote so far on 54%. That was actually the gap the very last opinion poll showed. But of course, we're not quite there yet. As John Curtis was saying, more votes still to count. Looks very difficult, though, for yes to overtake no at any point. Let's have a look at our battleground of councils. Bring them on for you. You can see a lot more red than green, can't you? And in fact, not very many councils left to count, maybe just 9 or so. So we had all of these no's down here. Just the odd yes. Dundee City. Glasgow, we just heard. Maybe the margin not big enough. West Dunbartonshire, yes. All the rest no's. I'll reorder them in order of size. We now have the huge Council of Glasgow, that area. 53%, 500,000 voters, 53% yes. We have North and South Lanarkshire in, so we're getting those big councils and then coming down and down here. And these were the first to declare. Coming in no, these island councils, first to declare, of course, because fewer votes to count. So that is a picture. If I reorder the screen now and I spread the councils, both sides, showing you no's on this side and yeses on this side, you really get a sense of the position that we're in at this moment. You can see all of these councils voting no here, and these 4 councils voting yes. The grey ones still counting. That's where we are at the moment. Hugh, back to you.
Jeremy, thanks very much. So Jeremy taking us through some of those individual areas. I can bring you the figures for North Ayrshire. Let's have a look at those, because we now have 24 local areas declared, and these are the figures for North Ayrshire. 47,000 yes, 49,000 no, so a modest majority for the no campaign on a turnout of 84%, and the percentage share of the vote 51% to 49%, so just a 2% margin there in North Ayrshire. A quick word on that, Sarah.
Well, that's following the pattern that we would expect somewhere, that if they were doing well, the yes campaign needed to take, somewhere where they've been making recent electoral gains when it comes to the Scottish Parliament, the kind of place that they really needed to do a lot better in than they have there.
OK. At Ingleston, that's the National Counting Centre. My colleague Andrew Marr is there. And Andy, just at this stage, now that John Curtis has signalled very firmly his view that we're now heading for a no result. You know, we're building in a few health warnings, but it's looking increasingly likely now. What is your sense of things there?
I think it's fairly clear what's happened is that prosperous, relatively well-doing Scotland wants to stay in the Union, and less prosperous, urban, poorer, working-class Scotland hasn't turned out in quite large enough numbers to overturn that. But I think one other thing has to be said at this point. Well over 1 million people in Scotland, having been threatened with the loss of their currency and great uncertainty and worry ahead, think that things are so bad at Westminster they would rather leave altogether. More than 1 million people. No democracy worth its salt can simply put its hands in its pocket and turn its back and walk away as if nothing has happened. This is a very, very momentous morning now, of course I should say, for British democracy. And I think we're going to see a huge amount of change coming over the next months and years. A lot of arguments, a lot of anger in England and at Westminster too. But you simply can't ignore numbers like this.
We talked earlier, Andy, about the Prime Minister making a statement in a short while, and we talked with Michael Gove quite a few hours ago now about the kind of arrangements that might be put in place and the discussions around them. What for you is realistic in terms of a timescale and getting consensus, really, at Westminster on what the way ahead should be?
Well, I think it's very, very hard to do this properly and fully before the election, although Gordon Brown has promised that. I think if we're going to see a recasting of the British state and a federal solution, that is going to take years to argue through. It's perfectly possible to give the Scottish Parliament pro tem more powers. And it's perfectly possible for the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Tories to get together and agree on the substance of that. That can go into general election manifestos and can be done relatively easy. I think it's much harder to get a new federal structure with a new all-Britain single chamber, the things we've been hearing about. The big problem is going to be, of course, the English one now. We've had the Scottish problem, now it's the English problem. Whether it's English votes for English laws or a full English Parliament, that is where the argument now goes.
Andy, thanks very much once again. Andrew Marr there for us at Ingleston. I'm expecting a declaration in South Ayrshire, Nick, in a moment. So, start your comment. Yeah.
When Andy talks about the unionist parties getting together to give more powers to Scotland, the big question after this vote is whether the SNP join that process. In the past, they've always refused to take part in what they regard as sort of second best to independence. Independence has been rejected, it looks like. They said that it would be for a generation. 15 years was the figure that Nicola Sturgeon.
I'm going to stop you, Nick. We're going to North Ayrshire. South Ayrshire.
OK, ready to go. I, Eileen Howitt, Counting Officer appointed for the South Ayrshire Council local government area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on the 18th September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the South Ayrshire Council area is 81,716. The turnout is 86.1%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 34,402. No, 47,000. 47,247 with 67 rejected papers. The reason for rejection are as follows. Voting in favour of both answers.
So the result in from South Ayrshire, that is our 25th result. 7 declarations to come. A look at the figures. South Ayrshire with 47,000 people voting against and 34,000 voting in favour of independence, 86% turnout, 58% therefore against, 42% in favour, and that's a 16% margin there. Sarah, what do you make of it?
Rabbie Burns' country voting no. South Ayrshire was one of these that could have gone either way if the vote had been much closer, but there's a fairly large majority there. So it's tending the way we seem to be seeing Scotland is going. So it's not a huge surprise in that regard. Quite a lot of Tory votes in South Ayrshire, actually, which may have buoyed up the no vote. But it's another good result for no, and they'll be pleased with that. And it does show the direction of travel, I think.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, this is all perhaps now much more settled in a pattern, and, you know, I hope this is what continues. I guess now it would be unlikely for Edinburgh or anywhere else to rock the boat in the opposite direction. Having said that, you know, Andrew Marr made the point earlier on, 1 million people have voted against this current structure, and we are going to have to sit down. And I hope, picking up on Nick's point before, that for the first time we can have a serious proposition that all the parties of Scotland will get round the table to look at devolution. We've never had that, and now would be the time, because no better way of healing wounds than getting people talking to one another and coming up with a common solution.
Is that likely, Hadi?
I just don't understand where this mandate, pledge, vow, promise, what's been promised. I mean, congratulations to Project Fear. They delivered fear, and, you know, it's come through. The people's voice was heard. And if we put aside, it's difficult to put to one side the momentous turnout across almost all the areas. But here's one has to bear in mind is that from the start of this campaign, the appetite for independence has doubled. Not enough for me, who wants an independent Scotland, but equally, tomorrow, nothing has changed. Not a single thing has changed. No MP or MSP has been elected or unelected. There are still food banks. There are still people waiting 4 days to eat. There are still austerity cuts. There are still people not getting access to basic human...
Hold the thought for a second.
The thought is held,
Let's go to East Ayrshire.
Held on 18th September 2014 hereby certify and declare: 1. The total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the East Ayrshire Council area is 84,262. The turnout is 84.5%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows: yes, 39,762. No, 44,400. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can allow me to conclude the declaration. No, 44,442. There were 58 rejected ballot papers. The reasons for rejection are as follows: want of official mark.
The result from East Ayrshire, and I think they get the prize actually for the most exotic stage setting of the night.
You've clearly never been to East Ayrshire, have you? Because it really is like that. Well, it would have been in an independent Scotland.
Striking. OK, so the figures for East Ayrshire are as follows: 44,000 to the No campaign, 39,000 to the Yes campaign. Turnout of 85%. Percentage terms, 53%, I beg your pardon, for the No's, 47% for the Yes campaign. East Ayrshire, Sarah?
Now, that really is a surprise. Yeah. It's moving in the same direction, as we say, the Nighties, which seems to be in favour of a no vote, but we were actually expecting a yes vote from East Ayrshire. That was one of the council areas most likely to vote yes. So a substantial no majority like that really is a surprise. This is a working class area with high unemployment. Kilmarnock's in East Ayrshire voted the least desirable place to live in 2013. And there's been a sizable swing to the SNP in recent Holyrood elections. They really should have taken East Ayrshire if they had any chance.
What explains it, Harley? Do you think it's, I mean, you say Project Fear, is that it?
I think to a great extent, from our point of view, and this is our point of view, we feel that on the Yes side we have had to face with the establishment, accusations of media bias, every single newspaper bar one against us, Treasury leaks, all the rest of it, the kind of business being sent up here to scare us, and the whole currency debate, spooking the markets. Now, that's what, we doubled our vote over the course of this. But again, I don't understand, and perhaps Mr Robinson, expert as he is in these matters, can explain to me how between now and the election in 2015 can this coalition of the motley crew of people that can't agree on anything come together. As the pledge is unravelling within 24 hours. The backbench Tories aren't going to allow David Cameron to deliver anything he said. The Lib Dems, the Lib Dems are the Lib Dems, and they're sitting at 8%. Labour's in disarray because they weren't prepared to put up any single big hitter. The great Labour leaders in Scotland are no more. The public wouldn't even recognise them if they walked by them in the street. So I don't understand where this mandate comes from. Nothing has changed. Scotland has voted for the status quo. Scotland will get the status quo, warts and all.
Well, the really interesting question, just because you put it to me, the really interesting question, I think, is exactly how each leader responds. We'll get a response, I'm told, from the Prime Minister first thing in the morning, reasserting his willingness to operate according to that agenda, that timetable that was set out by Gordon Brown. We'll also hear from Ed Miliband as well. But I think, crucially, it's what we now hear from Alex Salmond and from Nicola Sturgeon. Well, because there is a mandate for change in Scotland, clearly. And the question is, using that million and more votes, it's going up now for the Yes campaign, do they then say, well, we'll be part of that conversation. We will sit down at the table. So it won't just be the Unionist parties at Westminster doing it. It'll be the SNP here and other parties taking part in Scotland.
It's an important moment because at this stage, based on the results we have, with 26 results in and 6 results to come, the BBC's forecast now is that Scotland has voted no to independence, that the people of Scotland have rejected independence. We still have 6 results to come, but based on what we have, we don't think it's now likely in any way that the Yes campaign can reverse what's happening. And the BBC forecast now at 14 minutes past 5 in the morning, following the referendum, is that Scotland has voted no to independence. And it's a very big moment after such a highly charged campaign. The campaign started 2 years ago. For lots of people in the nationalist camp, the campaign started decades ago. But it's been a significant moment for Scottish democracy and a very big moment for British democracy too, actually. But there we are. The BBC forecast is that it's no. John Curtis is with us still. John, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first thing to say that clearly the no side have won, and in the end they have won sufficiently that I don't think anybody is going to dispute the fact that they are clearly the victors of this referendum, and that therefore the no side, the yes side, will now be having to decide how they're going to react to this, and in particular whether or not they are going to participate in the discussions and negotiations about developing plans for more devolution. The early signs seem to be that they will. That's now the question that they face. The success of the no side is, of course, rather greater than that anticipated by the final opinion polls, which were pointing to around a 48% yes vote. And to that extent, those who warned us that at the end of the day, voters may well will pull back from voting for change will probably feel justified in their arguments. That said, however, we should also remember that as recently as early August, the opinion polls on average were pointing to yes only being at 43. So I think one can also now be clear that it was the case that during the final weeks of the campaign, the yes side did make progress. And as a result, they do have a more substantial result than they looked as though they were going to get for most of this campaign. And that will therefore mean that the pressure on the no side to deliver on their promises of more devolution will still quite clearly be there.
John, thank you very much. We'll pick up again later, and that was John Curtis there. By the way, when the BBC forecast was made, this was the reaction at the Better Together headquarters. So that was the news sinking in, that the official forecast from the BBC is that Scotland has voted no to independence. Michael and Hardip are still with us, Sarah and Nick too. So, Michael, that's the forecast, and I want your response to that.
Be delighted. That's a fantastic outcome. I think, as John Curtis has highlighted, it has been, there's been quite a lot of shifting one way or the other. Just picking up on a couple of things that Hardip said earlier on, do need to remember the Scottish National Party has been in charge of Scotland's government for the last 7 years. So it has been the establishment in Scotland. So this hasn't simply been about plucky little Scotland being marginalised by the nasty British establishment. We've all been in this, we've all understood what is going on. We've also seen a debate in the last few weeks about the NHS in Scotland that came out of nowhere. I credit the campaigners with coming up with the ruse, but Scotland already has an independent NHS to all intents and purposes, and yet this suddenly became a massive issue in the campaign about why we had to have full independence. I hope we can step back from this, we can start to put the campaign slogans to the side and really get back to business on behalf of people across the country.
Let's find out, because I'm pleased to say we're joined by the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. She's at the Count in Glasgow. Nicola, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh.
Thanks very much for joining us. I know it's been a long night. The forecast has been made here. We're forecasting a no vote. Can I have your response to that first?
Well, if that is the result of the referendum, then clearly I am deeply disappointed. Like thousands of others across the country, I put my heart and soul into this campaign, and there's a real sense of disappointment that we've fallen narrowly short of securing a yes vote, albeit that we have had some spectacular successes, not least in Glasgow, my home city, where we saw a convincing yes vote. Scotland's biggest city voting yes is something that the Yes campaign is certainly celebrating. But other than that, obviously, deep personal personal and political disappointment. But I think there's a very clear message coming from the result tonight, both in terms of the turnout and in terms of the what looks like being the result, and that is that there is an appetite for change in Scotland. I think the country has been changed forever by this campaign. What we are emphatically not seeing in this result is any kind of endorsement for the status quo. More than 1 million people voting for independence. Many of those who didn't vote for independence, I'm sure, didn't because they believed that substantial new powers would come to the Parliament in the event of a no vote. So that appetite for change now must be delivered upon.
As you say, there's an appetite for change, and that is evident in the result. And if independence now is no longer an option, what form does that change take, do you think?
Well, you know, it was the no parties in the campaign, of course, who set out a timetable. I was sceptical of that. I remain sceptical of that. It was never very clear during the campaign what additional powers they intended to devolve. But nevertheless, they made some very clear commitments to the people of Scotland, and those commitments now must be delivered upon. I'll certainly work with anybody in any way to deliver that kind of empowerment for our Parliament and those substantial new powers. But I think the onus is now in the no campaign, if indeed we do have a no vote tonight, to set out very clearly and very quickly how they intend to deliver on those commitments.
Nicola, Nick Robinson's here, wants to ask a question too.
I was struck by you saying, Nicola, that you would work with anyone in any way. So will the SNP now sit at the table with the three unionist parties to discuss the detail of this, or are you saying you're just waiting for them to come up with an offer to which you then react?
Well, you were right to pick up on what I said, and I said it in all sincerity. I'm the kind of politician, I want Scotland to have maximum power. I wanted Scotland to become an independent country, so I am indicating a willingness to work with whoever in order to deliver that. But of course it was the no campaign, the no parties, who set out a timetable and said that they wanted to deliver more powers. I understand David Cameron is going to be making some kind of statement in the next few hours, and obviously we will see the detail of that and then we will respond to that. But I'm saying very clearly that I've listened and we have listened to the demand that has been expressed through this result tonight for substantial change in Scotland. Our country is never going to be the same again as a result of this campaign, both in terms of the nature of the campaign, a wonderfully exhilarating, empowering experience that saw record high turnout, but also in terms of people, both people who voted yes and those who would have voted no because they believe substantial more powers were coming, who absolutely want now to see those powers delivered.
And the focus for you would be on developing what in the manifestos that you've already seen three unionist parties bring forward? Because I accept there was no agreed package, but they've all talked about some sort of income tax coming here in addition to what's already in the Scotland Act. They've all talked about benefits as well. What more will you now be saying?
Well, you know, what was put forward, even by those, and the Conservatives were offering full devolution of income tax, and I think that's what needs to be delivered in terms of tax, but all of their proposals felt woefully short in terms of welfare powers. Nothing that any of those parties were offering would allow us to do anything about the draconian attack on some of the most vulnerable in our society as a result of the welfare changes. Alistair Darling famously, during one of the debates, the BBC leaders debate, couldn't name a single job creating power that was proposed. So I'm very clear that what was put forward in the course of the campaign falls short of what Scotland needs. But in the last few days, the No campaign were making very clear signals that they were prepared to go further, and I think it's now time for them to deliver, because what we've seen in this result tonight is a strong demand for change. And after the campaign we've been through, where people have found their voice in Scotland, I don't think people are going to sit back and allow politicians to renege on their promises.
Nicola, Sarah Smith is here too with a question.
Yes, Nicola, do you envisage a situation, given what you've said, what you believe the offer that's been made by the unionist parties, that in talking to them you will ever be able to come up with a compromise you can recommend to the people of Scotland?
See, I'm absolutely sure that over the next few days we'll have many discussions about the content and the detail of this. You will all appreciate it's 5:30 in the morning. We still don't have all of the results in. We don't know the final tally, and all of these things are important. I think although clearly we can see the direction of travel of the results that are in so far, but it's important that every part of Scotland gets to have its say, that we see the final result, and then tomorrow I'm sure we'll all move into some of these discussions. I'm indicating tonight that I will always, and my party will always, seek to do the best for Scotland and to deliver the maximum for Scotland in terms of the powers we think our country needs.
On a more personal level, can I ask you, most people a year ago, 2 years ago, didn't think this was winnable for you and have been amazed at how close you've come. In your heart, did you really think it was winnable? Of course you have to have self-belief in a campaign. You have to say you're going to win it. But did you really think it was doable?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, I thought it was doable 2 years ago, but certainly over the last few weeks, I absolutely believed in my heart and in my head that this was capable of being won. There was undoubtedly momentum towards the Yes campaign over the past couple of weeks. I think that momentum was continuing right into polling day. It looks as if it's not quite been enough, and that's deeply disappointing. I've never fought a campaign as hard as this one in my entire life, and there are thousands upon thousands of people in the Yes campaign who are in the same position. So, I'm not going to do the politician thing of trying to spin my way out of this. I feel deeply personally disappointed, but also quite exhilarated by the campaign that we've just come through, and I'm determined that we move on from this and we listen and react to that clear desire for change that has been expressed.
A quick question, Nicola, because you mentioned your disappointment, which we understand. Have you spoken to Alex Salmond during the night?
I speak to Alex Salmond all the time. I'll no doubt see him in about an hour when I get through to Edinburgh.
Did he share his response with you earlier or not?
I haven't seen him face to face, but obviously we've been keeping in touch as the results have unfolded. But I'll see him shortly. I'm leaving here to go to Edinburgh, and I'll catch up with him there. And
I'm assuming he will share your deep personal disappointment as well.
Look, every single member of the Yes campaign will be deeply disappointed. I believe in my heart and my head that independence is the right future for Scotland. I'm not going to stop believing that, although I absolutely will accept the result. I'm not going to stop believing that. So, yes, we will all, Alec included, be deeply disappointed. We've been arguing this case for most of, well, in my case and in his, for all of our adult lives, because we deeply believe it. So yes, there will be disappointment, but also a determination to move on from this. You're absolutely right. We have come much closer than anybody, apart from ourselves perhaps, said that we were able to do just a few months ago, and that is because we've made a compelling case, and many people have responded to that, and some of those who didn't vote yes will have voted no because they believe that vote would deliver more power. So I said earlier on, and I absolutely hold to this, Scotland has changed forever. There's no going back to the time before this referendum and just having business as usual. The status quo has not got any kind of endorsement or mandate tonight, and politicians have to absolutely understand that.
Mr Cameron will be saying something later, we understand, Nicola. Can we expect Mr Salmond to be saying something too?
I'm sure you can, yes.
I think we'd... Nick, do you want one more?
I've just got a final word. I think there'll be people watching this programme whose mood may be one of despair. We've seen the excitement that there was on the streets. I just wonder what your message is to people who are not professional politicians like you, who place their hopes in this and may really feel despair tonight at what's happened.
Well, people will be disappointed, and I'm not going to stand here at this point, when dawn is not evil. I don't know if dawn's broken yet, it probably has, and tell people just to brush aside their disappointment. This has been a campaign that people, I have to say, on both sides, have invested a lot of emotion and time and effort and commitment to, and people of course are going to take time to get over the disappointment of that, but we should not lose sight of what has happened in Scotland over the past few weeks. This campaign has been the best thing I've ever been involved in my life, and I say that now when it looks as if we might not get the yes vote that I was hoping for. I say that as strongly now as I would have said it to you this time yesterday. So we need to pick ourselves up and move on. That appetite for change, that demand for change is there, and we've got a responsibility to make sure that demand is met.
Nicola, you've been very generous with your time. It's 28 minutes past 5. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll no doubt speak later on today. Thanks very much. Nicola Sturgeon there. And, well, there were lots of messages in there, Nick, didn't you think? And
yeah,
Sarah too?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I thought it was fascinating, really, that she is signalling, I think, that when we hear from Alex Salmond, of course, again, we'll hear just what we heard from her, which is that great disappointment that she expressed, but a total determination that there's million and more votes that's been got, that a sum total for the No campaign of the high 40%. Let's remember that's 15% above where traditionally independence was always regarded as on about a third in this country for about 2 or 3 decades. It's clear to me that the leadership of the SNP, the leadership of the Scottish Government will now say, we have a mandate for change, we have a mandate to be consulted, to be persuaded, to be convinced of the powers that the Unionist Party in Westminster are coming up with. And if it's not good enough, we will have a mandate to argue, to fight, to get a better deal.
Sarah?
We are going to hear from Alex Salmond at 10 o'clock in the morning from his official residence in Edinburgh, and I think Rick's right, we'll hear very similar messages we heard from Nicola Sturgeon there, who did not say she was going to take part in a process to determine what these powers are going to be. The 3 main parties don't agree on them. They've talked about a conversation within Civic Scotland to come up with some kind of agreement. It was not clear from what Nicola Sturgeon said there that the SNP were going to be a part of that conversation. They may well take a view on whether or not it's good enough and say that they have a large mandate to try and force their hand, but it wasn't clear they were going to actually cooperate.
Just to look at the forecast, because we mentioned the forecast earlier. The forecast is for a no, and Nicola Sturgeon acknowledging the strength of that forecast. But let's have a look at the predicted share, and there you have the margin which is attached to that prediction now. 55% a no, 45% yes, and that's the kind of margin that we are looking at, and it's difficult to see that moving a lot now, given what's still to come. A quick word from Hardip and Michael, and then we'll have a news summary. Hardip?
We need to make sure we don't get carried away with the hyperbole of what is a binary vote. People are much closer than the yes-no suggests. There were a lot of people that would have sat and looked at a blank ballot paper and made up their mind there and then. In the main, we on the yes side, in the main, believe that the no folks wanted what was best in their eyes for Scotland, as we wanted what was best for Scotland. There are peripheries and edges of Muppets, as we call them up here, that no one will be able to communicate with and talk to. But for the main part, we share a vision for a better Scotland. The outcome may be different. People talk about healing divisions and rifts in Scotland. Scotland's been divided along these fault lines pretty much for all of my life and long before that, because apparently there was a world before I was around. I'm upset to think there was too. These rifts have always been there. This is not insurmountable by any means. Actually, there's a brilliant opportunity with a genuine mandate. It's not the result I wanted, but it's a mandate. The people have spoken. We must listen.
The mandate.
Yeah, I agree that Scotland has changed. It is inconceivable that we would sit and just tolerate the status quo. So all of the UK party leaders and the First Minister of Scotland have got to respond tomorrow in a way that signals to all the people who voted, this amazing exercise in democracy, amazing, staggering turnout, that hope, that energy is not put away and expected to be ignored.
Okay.
So, Michael, you're a senior Liberal Democrat in Scotland, former Secretary of State. Presumably you were part of it when the 3 UK party leaders came together and decided to sign that vow in which they pledged there would be more powers. What conversations have there been about trying to find some common agreement between your 3 really quite different offers of more devolution?
These are, I believe, my judgment, still in relatively early stages. However, tonight's results turbocharges that debate. For the Prime Minister tomorrow, any of the other UK leaders or the Scottish party leaders to try and slough it off and say, right, business as usual, would sow the seeds of a result
Michael,
which in a few years' time would reverse tonight.
You've had 2 years, and it's in the early stages.
No.
You've had 2 years to give us something.
Hang on.
Something. You rushed in at the last minute with some mandate written on the back of a fag packet. That's what you've done. That's what the Scottish people are worth.
No, that's unfair.
Well, give me one policy.
Uncharacteristically unfair.
Give me one policy.
On income tax,
that you've all agreed
on job centres and work programmes, on housing benefit. Those 3 things across the parties, there's consistency there. And I think we should see more effort put into resolving some of the differences at the edges.
We've got to do it. Let's pause. We'll have more talk to come because we still have 6 results to come to. 26 results in, 6 declarations to come. It's time for a summary of the news.
Hello, I'm Carol Walker with a summary of the main news. With most results declared in the Scottish referendum, it looks as if people in Scotland have voted against independence. The Yes campaign did win in Glasgow and Dundee, but this was not enough to secure victory for Alex Salmond and the Yes camp. Latest figures show the no vote leading by 54% to 46%. The final outcome is expected in the next couple of hours. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
This is what a good start looks like for the No campaign. Lift off for one activist and lift off for those wanting to keep Scotland in the UK. Clackmannanshire, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles voted no, as did Renfrewshire.
Yes, 55,466. No, 62,067.
But within the last hour, wins for the Yes campaign, including in Dundee.
Yes, 53,620. No, 39,880.
And just look what that victory meant at Yes campaign headquarters.
I'm very pleased with the result. You know, it's obviously early in the evening. I'm optimistic there'll be other positive results to come along. I think particularly some of the larger population areas in Scotland, and I think we'll see how things progress.
But analysts say it's the No campaign who have the upper hand so far and are more likely to win. If there is a no vote overall, the government at Westminster says big changes are coming across the UK.
If, as we all hope, we can secure enhanced devolution for Scotland in short order, we also need, with a similar sense of urgency, to make sure that other people within the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in Wales and, of course, in England, have their voices more clearly heard and respected than ever before.
You need a head for numbers and strong fingers for a night in one of the 32 count centres across Scotland. Dawn is not far away, but there's still plenty of counting to do. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released which appears to show a British journalist being held captive by Islamic State extremists. John Cantley, seen here in Syria, was captured while working as a newspaper journalist. In the latest footage, Mr. Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech into the camera. The US Senate has approved President Obama's plan to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels to fight Islamic State militants. Mr. Obama said the vote demonstrated that Americans were united in their determination to destroy the group. 6 million people in Sierra Leone are being confined to their homes until Sunday as part of government efforts to tackle Ebola. Officials will go house to house to identify victims. The outbreak has already killed more than 2,500 people in the region, most of them in neighbouring Liberia. The High Court will decide today whether to allow a challenge to rules introduced by the government last year, which determine whether victims of domestic abuse receive legal aid in divorce and child contact cases. Campaigners say the changes have resulted in victims not being able to provide the evidence needed to qualify, and that women aren't taking legal action as a result, leaving themselves vulnerable to further violence. And that's it from me. Now let's go back to Scotland Decides.
OK, Carol, thanks very much. And, well, let's have a look at where we are. We are here at the headquarters of BBC Scotland in Glasgow and Pacific Quay, and we're projecting the results so far onto our headquarters here. And so far, the Yes campaign on 1.17 million, No on 1.39 million. We have 26 results in. We have 6 local authority areas to declare, and they include Edinburgh. That is the biggest of the ones that remains. And if we take a look at, can we take a look at the ones still counting? Do we have the list of the local authority areas still counting, just to remind ourselves? And there we are. Edinburgh and Fife, that is Gordon Brown's area and Ming Campbell's area. Aberdeenshire, well, that includes the constituency of Alex Salmond and indeed his former Westminster constituency of Banff-and-Buchan. That's all in Aberdeenshire. Highland, well, a very dispersed area and lots of logistics there, but they're still counting. Murray, well, that's interesting too, because we're still expecting Murray, which, as Sarah was just telling us earlier, is an area with a big SNP tradition, and Argyll and Bute, which again is an area which is very dispersed, and there are some islands involved too. So those are the ones still counting, and there are good reasons for that. In Edinburgh, for example, just the volume of votes involved. So as soon as we get a declaration from any of those, we'll be there straight away. In the meantime, let's go to Westminster and join Andrew.
Thanks, Hugh. So it's a vote for the union to survive. Looks like the margin's 55 to 45, which is more than any of the last-minute polls told us. So maybe the yes vote are not the only losers tonight. The pound has soared to almost 165 against the dollar. It's hitting almost 128 against the euro, which is a recent record. The Prime Minister is speaking at 7 o'clock. He will make a statement. He's expected to reiterate his plans for further devolution to the Parliament in Edinburgh. But because of backbench pressure, he's also expected to say something about what that would mean for England and the rest of the United Kingdom. Our constitutional expert, Peter Hennessy, is back. Isabel Hardman from The Spectator is with us too. And you keep your ear close to the Tory backbenches. I'm told that what the position Mr. Cameron, they'll be relieved they've won, but the position Mr. Cameron has put them in, they're very unhappy, and that happiness goes all the way up into the cabinet.
Yes, it does. And they feel that they haven't really been consulted properly, which is always David Cameron's problem, is that he makes decisions without factoring in the will of his party, and then they feel very resentful. And even though he hasn't been seriously damaged by a yes vote, this is a no vote, which is good news for him. It's still bad news for him because his party is still unhappy.
All right, well, we hear that Mr. Cameron has tweeted about Mr. Darling and congratulated him on winning the campaign. What do we think Mr. Cameron's going to say now about the implications of more devolution for Scotland for the rest of the United Kingdom?
He absolutely has to spell out the implications for England. If he doesn't mention that, which I'd be surprised if he didn't, then his backbenchers would go into uproar. He needs to talk about the implications for English regions, for English councils. And one of the questions he probably also needs to answer is how on earth to sell that to the electorate. English voters may well feel left out in this discussion, but they have rejected attempts at devolution in the past. And Number 10 has also been very bad at making the case for local democracy, such as police and crime commissioners, city mayors. They've really failed on those counts, so he's got a big challenge ahead of him.
Yes, would have been simpler, wouldn't it? It would have been cleaner, at least. And this is going to be very messy.
It would have been the most extraordinary day if it had gone the other way. I hope David Cameron acknowledges, I suspect he will in his words in a few hours' time, just how brittle the union is. Down here in Westminster and Whitehall in England, we only woke up to the brittleness of the union very late on, beginning of September, with that first YouGov poll showing the narrowing. But let's think, running through Mr. Cameron's mind, it's not a good idea for anybody to speculate about anybody else's consciousness. But just think if it had gone the other way, he'd have had to have flown to Balmoral this morning to explain to the Queen why he'd lost her kingdom. He's very punctilious about his relationships with the Queen. He wouldn't have wanted to do it over the telephone. There would have been a cabinet this afternoon, I suspect, and Parliament would have been recalled perhaps even for tomorrow.
Right, but none of that's going to happen.
No.
What is going to happen?
What is going to happen is a knock-on effect which we can't predict. We've talked earlier, Andrew, about the dangers in rushing constitutional legislation. And also, when you look at that vow that was put together for the Daily Record, those pledges, was one of them, which is still tinkling around in my mind, that we will make the Scottish Parliament permanent. Now, the Scotland Act 1998, as you remember, creates it, but we have a tradition in this country of not producing entrenched legislation that successive parliaments can't amend or abandon if they want to. So does that mean we're going to have to change the British Constitution to put in statutory form that pledge to make the Scottish Parliament permanent? There's no question the Scottish Parliament would be anything other than permanent. Nobody's going to repeal the Scotland Act 1998, but it's another intriguing repercussion of that very rushed vow that they all put together.
Is there not a feeling among some Tory backbenchers that Mr. Cameron ripped up the British Constitution on the back of a rogue YouGov poll?
I think so. I think they saw that there was a huge amount of panic at the top of the establishment, and that there wasn't a great deal of thought. The problem is that Better Together had been asking for more details on what the leaders would promise for months, but they didn't produce them until they were in a blind panic.
Now, I understand that there's also deep unhappiness on Labour backbenches about Mr Miliband's performance, but also about the kind of devolution that Gordon Brown has been talking about.
Yes, so there have been MPs such as John Denham who've also been talking about the English question. And there is a real question for Labour here, which is how would this campaign have gone had Scottish Labour been a stronger force in Scotland?
Because they lost a lot of the Labour areas, and I understand that Joanne Lamont, the Scottish Labour leader, her constituency voted strongly yes for independence.
And I was talking to a Labour strategist earlier who said, well, you know, this is a big win for no, but let's not ignore the horror of the working class vote who seem to have deserted us.
I mean, is Westminster going to try and agree a position among itself and then go and negotiate with the Scottish Government about further devolution, or is it going to say, this is what we've agreed and this is what we're going to do?
The short answer, you've no idea, but it will not be a good idea if it is done that way without consulting Wales and Northern Ireland and more widely. It's Kipling's line on the Boer War, it's no end of a lesson. And the danger is that this great sigh of relief, which is almost audible across the Thames as we sit here,
indeed it is,
will soothe people. They'll start singing lullabies to themselves that it was all right on the night, we shouldn't have got so jumpy, the press got carried away, and they will be wrong.
All right. Well, Prime Minister making a statement at 7 a.m. here in London. Back to Hugh in Glasgow.
Andrew, thank you very much, and thanks to your guests too. Well, you can't miss the screen, can you really? 1.176 for the Yes campaign, 1.397 for the No campaign, and that is the basis on which we're forecasting a No result. And, of course, that's the basis on which now politicians, including Nicola Sturgeon, are admitting that they are personally very disappointed at what they acknowledge as a defeat. And we've now had news that the Prime Minister has called Alistair Darling. David Cameron has called him, and Alistair Darling, who led the Better Together campaign, and he said he's congratulated him on a well-fought campaign. That's the statement from David Cameron, which we received just a couple of minutes ago. I've congratulated Alistair Darling, the chairman of Better Together, on a well-fought campaign, and we're expecting Mr Cameron to make a statement at Westminster in Downing Street probably at 7 a.m. So not long to go, just over an hour before that, and it'll be interesting to see what he says, about plans to respond in a meaningful way and a convincing way and a credible way to this result, because although it is a relief for Mr Cameron and the other pro-union parties, of course it is, they also will have to acknowledge the strength of the vote for breaking away from the rest of the United Kingdom. So that is something to acknowledge. Let's go to Cardiff, because we have Peter Hain there, the former Labour Cabinet Minister, former Secretary of State for Wales. Peter, good morning to you.
Morning, Hugh, from Wales.
Absolutely. And given your role back in 97, Peter, with delivering devolution, those are early days of the process. Let's have your thoughts on today's vote in Scotland.
For me, the vote in Scotland was a revolt against the Westminster elite, both yes voters and no voters. And what now needs to happen as a matter of urgency is that the Prime Minister and all the party leaders have got to seize this opportunity. The natural inclination of the Westminster establishment is to be minimalist and incremental. The decision has got to be maximalist and radical, because there's such a strong feeling throughout the country, not just in Scotland but in Wales and in England as well, against the way that politics has been done. And I think Scotland has spoken for the whole of the United Kingdom in saying we want change, and we want change that's got to sweep right through the United Kingdom, and that must include England. Yes, more powers for Scotland have been promised. Wales will need more powers and deserve more powers as well, and probably Northern Ireland too. But the big unanswered question for British politics has been the English question, and the need for people in England, whether they're in Cornwall or the northeast of England or Manchester City region, to say, we want more say too. We don't want to be ruled by the London elite any more than Scotland, people in Scotland did.
Peter, bear with us, because Alex Salmond has also been on social media just giving his response. And Mr Salmond, the First Minister, saying, well done to Glasgow, our Commonwealth city. Glasgow, of course, voted yes in this referendum, and to the people of Scotland for such incredible support, he said. That statement in the past few minutes, and we're expecting Mr Salmond to be speaking later on in Edinburgh, and Nicola Sturgeon seemed to suggest that she wanted a very radical response to this, Peter, and that's exactly what you've been saying too. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to parties at Westminster working together on a response, and Mr Cameron's going to have to signal this in a short while, what will make that pledge from Mr Cameron, for you, a credible one, and one that can deliver proper change in a pretty rapid space of time?
If he's absolutely clear that not only is Scotland going to get the powers, the extra powers that were promised by all three party leaders the other week, but that Wales will as well, and that England will too, not just rearranging the way Westminster might do its business in terms of our Parliament, but actually saying to the people of England, you're entitled to more say as well. London shouldn't run things and dominate you, and it shouldn't be this old, centralised, anachronistic way of doing things. And I think he's got to be radical, because that's what the mood is. And it should include as well dealing with the House of Lords. There are conservative forces in all parties, frankly, who don't like change. And this has got to be a moment for change, and that should be to reconstitute the second chamber, to reflect all the parts of the United Kingdom directly elected at the same time as a general election. So we have a democratic second chamber as well. Yes, perhaps keep an appointed a bit of that in order to manage the change, but fundamentally a democratic second chamber complementing radical decentralisation of power throughout the United Kingdom. Only this, I think, can restore politics to some kind of legitimacy, because we've discredited ourselves increasingly over recent years, and people are fed up with us.
Just a last point, Peter. Gordon Brown talks about home rule, using that rather old-fashioned term now. But if you accept that this is part of, if you like, a kind of federal solution to the imbalance that we have at the moment, does that, just to spell it out for us and to spell it out for viewers, does that involve having an English Parliament, as well as a proper Welsh Parliament and a Scottish Parliament and an equally powerful body in Northern Ireland?
There should be a federal Westminster Parliament, alongside which Scottish Parliament, legislatures in Wales and Northern Ireland, and legislatures in the regions of England too. And within that context of a federal Westminster Parliament, London already has, within England, substantial control. So I don't think there should be an English Parliament, but what there should be is real devolved power to the communities and regions and city regions of England, from Cornwall to the northeast, from Manchester City region to London as it already exists. That's got to be the way forward. And maybe we need to look at English MPs being solely responsible for scrutinising English-only laws at Westminster. But you've got to avoid balkanising Parliament and having first- and second-class MPs. We've got to go for a federal solution, not an English Parliament, which, after all, over 4 out of 5 MPs are from English constituencies. England dominates our existing Parliament. And there's one other final point I'd make about this. You don't want a situation where actually the Prime Minister has to be elected by English MPs alone because he or she has to command a majority amongst English MPs in Parliament. It's got to be a Prime Minister elected who reflects the whole of the UK, or otherwise you will see an accelerating momentum for independence and breakaways across the United Kingdom. So this is a real moment of change, and we've got to grasp it.
Peter, very good of you to join us at 10 to 6 in the morning. Thank you very much. Peter Hain there, the former Labour Cabinet Minister, giving us his views, and as someone who's worked in some detail on policy to devolve power over the past 20 years. If you've just joined us here on this BBC election special, referendum special, we're broadcasting from the headquarters of BBC Scotland in Glasgow, and the Scottish referendum on independence has taken place. There are 26 results in, there are 6 results to go. But the BBC has already forecast that the result will be a no. a rejection of independence. But we're on air because we've got some very important results yet to come from Edinburgh and from Fife and Aberdeenshire. I'll be introducing my new guest in just a moment, but before that, Jeremy Vine with some thoughts on what happens now that we know it is likely to be a no.
Well, Hugh, just listening to you and Peter Hain there, it underlines the fact that if you'll forgive the triple negative, a no vote tonight doesn't mean no change. There are already actually changes coming down the track for Scotland from the 2012 Scotland Act. Let's have a look at some of them. So there will be a power to vary the Scottish rate of income tax, for a start. Also to take the proceeds of stamp duty levied in Scotland. This is already coming down the line. Land tax and landfill tax, more powers there for the Scottish Parliament. Also powers over drink driving and speeding limits. And then one of the ones that the Nationalists say, well, this proves it's small beer, they're going to be given more powers over controlling air guns. But during the campaign we heard more, didn't we? And now we're trying to find out what the more actually means. The party leaders making this big promise that they were going to share resources equitably, and saying as well that the Scottish Government would have the final say on NHS funding. A lot of people said, well, it does already. But they did promise that talks would start immediately after the referendum, with new proposals for further devolution by the end of October. And then by the end of November, a white paper. And then on January the 15th, a new law published. And the question now is what will be in that new law published in January 2015. January the 15th, rather. Control of a greater amount of tax take. That's one possibility. Also, income tax, more powers to vary it. Housing benefit as well, the chance to set different levels of housing benefit. Power over VAT, to change the level of VAT, is another possible one. And air passenger transport duty, which would give the Scottish Government power over the price of a plane seat, that as well. Plus quite a big one, the power to change inheritance tax and capital gains tax levels, and also maybe even to look at new levels of benefits. Plus, as was discussed with Peter Hennessy and Andrew Neil, the Scottish Parliament constitutionally guaranteed, and the big Lib Dem thought that maybe at the end of all of this you have a federal UK. So an enormous amount of change coming, and possibly even more when that white paper is published in 2015.
Jeremy, thank you very much. We've got some more figures to share with you because while Jeremy was speaking, we had some more declarations. I got Aberdeenshire's. Now, this is an interesting result again because just to underline, this is the local authority area that includes Alex Salmond's parliamentary seat in East Aberdeenshire. And this is the result. It's a big no vote, 60% to 40%, 108,000 to 71,000. A high turnout again of 87%. So Aberdeenshire at 5 to 6 in the morning declaring a big no vote. And that means that we are in a position where we can also give you the result from Edinburgh, I think. Yes, it's in. There it is. A hefty no vote, as has been forecast all night. 194,000 votes for the no campaign. 123,000 of Edinburgh's voters backing independence, a turnout of 84%. The percentages as follows: 61% against, 39% in favour in Edinburgh. And I think we've just had a result in too from Argyll and Bute. Let me just see if I can get the figures up for you, given that they've just come in. Another no vote there, 37,000 to 26,000, and the percentages 59% to 41%. The counting's still going on in 3 areas. So we're counting still in Fife and in Highland and in Murray. It's interesting because we were expecting Murray a little earlier. And if you look at the little figure on the screen here, no are short by 85,112 votes at the moment. So they're very near the point at which we can formally say that no have won. Sarah?
I tell you what's absolutely fascinating about that. You look at Aberdeenshire and you look at Edinburgh and the vote is almost exactly the same. 61% no in Edinburgh, 60% in Aberdeenshire. Aberdeenshire is where, as you said, Alex Salmond has his Scottish constituency, where he had his Westminster constituency. That's going to be very deeply personally disappointing for him. Edinburgh, that's where Alistair Darling has his constituency, where we were expecting a larger no vote. Places we thought would behave really quite differently have behaved almost exactly the same, with basically a 40-60 split.
Yeah, interesting, Nick. And, that brings us very close now to the finishing line.
It's incredibly close, yes. We knew really as soon as Glasgow came in that it was simply impossible for Yes, despite the fact that it won Scotland's biggest city, despite the fact that is something that Alex Salmond wants to celebrate, it was nowhere near enough to outweigh the other votes that had come in throughout the night. It is still... this. Always with elections, with referendums too, it depends where your starting point was. If you were last weekend when that Yes poll, when for the first and only poll they're in the lead, this will seem like a great setback, a huge disappointment to those who support Yes. Wind back the clock 2 years ago when the talk was of them being easily slaughtered, maybe being in the high 30s or the low 40s. This will seem like vast progress, a huge number of votes accumulated for the Yes campaign. But the simple truth of it is, as people